Some disappearances leave behind clues, footprints, broken glass, or a desperate note scribbled in panic. But the case of Amelia Mayfield left nothing but silence. No screams, no traces, no body. Just a town that stopped sleeping, and a family that stopped believing in closure. For decades, her name lived in whispers, passed down through old news clippings, half-forgotten police reports, and the haunted stories parents told their children to keep them close after dark. Everyone in Ashpine Valley remembers the night Amelia vanished. No one remembers seeing her again. October 17th, 1978. Ashpine Valley, Oregon, was the kind of place where nothing changed. A town tucked between damp forests and fading farmlands, surrounded by the constant whisper of wind through pine. In the late 1970s, it was home to fewer than 2,000 people, most of them born, raised, and buried within its same square miles. To the locals, strangers stood out, and silence was a language everyone spoke. Amelia Mayfield was 17 when she disappeared. A quiet, observant girl with long dark hair and eyes that always seemed to be somewhere else. She lived with her parents, Richard and Eileen Mayfield, in a creaking white farmhouse at the edge of Miller's Road, a dead-end stretch that disappeared into the woods. Her father was a mechanic. Her mother worked part-time at the library. Their lives were simple, predictable, and, at least on the surface, peaceful. But the town knew something had changed in the months before she vanished. Neighbors said Amelia had started walking alone at night, taking the long road past the tree line, humming to herself, sometimes carrying a small notebook. Others swore they'd seen her speaking to someone near the woods, though no one could ever describe the person clearly. By early autumn, those walks became nightly. When her mother asked why, Amelia said the forest made her feel calm, that the trees listened better than people did. Her father brushed it off as teenage imagination, but Eileen began locking the doors earlier, leaving the porch light on longer, and whispering prayers under her breath before bed. On the night of October 17th, 1978, the valley was wrapped in heavy fog. The sky was moonless, the air colder than usual. Richard and Eileen went to bed around 10:30 p.m. Amelia's bedroom light was still on, soft music playing from her cassette deck. A slow, echoing song called The Wanderer's Lament. When Eileen woke at 2 a.m., she noticed the light was off. The cassette had stopped. But the back door was open, and Amelia's shoes were gone. They searched until dawn. Her coat still hung by the door. Her notebook was missing. There were no footprints in the mud, only the damp impression of where she'd stood before stepping into the fog. The sheriff's department arrived before sunrise. Deputy Hollis, a tall man with permanent exhaustion carved into his face, organized a grid search. They combed through 5 square miles of forest, from the Mayfield property to Ashpine Creek. No torn clothing, no blood, no signs of struggle. For 3 days, over 40 volunteers scoured the woods. Tracking dogs followed her scent for nearly half a mile before it disappeared at the edge of the old quarry, a site abandoned since 1952 after 3 workers died in a cave-in. By day 4, the fog thickened again. Some searchers swore they heard footsteps near the ravine. Others claimed they saw light flickering deep in the trees, like a lantern swaying between trunks, but no one ever found its source. The case should have ended like so many others, unsolved, tragic, faded into memory. But then came the letters. 2 weeks after Amelia vanished, the Mayfields received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Written in Amelia's handwriting were 6 words: "Don't look for me. I'm home now." The handwriting was verified. The paper was identical to the notebook she always carried. But the sheriff insisted someone else must have written it. Perhaps to confuse investigators, or torment the family. Still, more letters followed, each one stranger than the last. The second read, "The forest breathes at night. It remembers." The third, "You shouldn't have buried the well." That last one sent the sheriff back into the woods. Near the old quarry was an overgrown well, sealed with concrete decades earlier. Hollis ordered it excavated, and beneath the cracked stone they found something that made every man in that valley wish they hadn't looked. Inside were bones. Not one person's, but several. Some animal, some human, most small. The forensic team couldn't determine how old they were, but the remains dated back at least 30 years before Amelia's birth. And in the center of that pit, they found a necklace, a locket containing a photograph of a girl that looked eerily like Amelia, though the picture was dated 1923. The discovery reignited the investigation. The town of Ashpine, once content in its silence, began whispering again. People dug through old newspapers, recalling stories of children who had gone missing generations ago, all near the same patch of woods. One report from 1947 mentioned a family who vanished overnight, the Danners. Their farmhouse had been built less than a mile from the quarry, and when police arrived, they found dinner still on the table, candles burning down to stubs, and the doors wide open. The case had been forgotten until Amelia's letter mentioned the well. By November, the Mayfields stopped receiving letters. The fog lifted. The searches ended. But something strange began happening to those who had joined the search parties. Deputy Hollis stopped coming to work. A local logger, one of the volunteers, claimed he heard Amelia's voice near the creek one night. Within a week, he was found sitting on his porch at dawn, eyes open, unmoving, muttering the same 6 words from the first letter. When investigators questioned him, he only said, "She found her way home." By winter, Ashpine Valley was emptying. Families moved away. The Mayfield house was abandoned by spring. And in the decades since, no one has dared live there again. After the discovery at the sealed well, Ashpine Valley never returned to normal. The investigation slowed, but rumors spread faster than the fog ever had. Every family that stayed behind felt watched, not by people, but by the woods themselves. The forest that had once been quiet began to sound alive again. Branches creaked in patterns, owls stopped calling, and sometimes the wind carried what sounded like a child's laughter. Sheriff Don Hollis, though determined to stay rational, started keeping the case files in his own home. He said it was to protect them from tampering. but Eileen Mayfield believed it was because he was scared. Scared that if the papers stayed at the station, they'd keep changing. The handwriting in the letters, Amelia's handwriting, appeared again in other places. Scribbled on a church pew, carved into a tree near the quarry, etched faintly in the dust of the Mayfields' abandoned porch window. Always the same phrase. Don't look for me. Forensic analysis never solved how those marks were made. The scratches were shallow but deliberate, made by something sharp like a small blade. The carvings seemed fresh, as if written only hours before they were found, even though the house had been sealed by police tape for weeks. In late December 1978, a cold front blanketed the valley in snow. The roads froze, isolating Ashpine for days. It was during that week that Hollis made a discovery he never reported publicly. In the margins of Amelia's school notebooks found in her room were fragments of what seemed like journal entries. The forest doesn't end where you think it does. There are doors made of air. I saw one open. Something old is under the ground. It hums when it rains. These weren't written like teenage poetry. They read more like observations, detached, clinical, as though she were recording evidence of something real. The last note, written days before she disappeared, said, "The well remembers their names." I can hear them now. Hollis didn't tell the Mayfields about this discovery, but he did make one private phone call to a retired state geologist named Arthur Bly, who had studied subsurface patterns near the quarry back in the 1950s. Bly was an old man by then, nearly 80, but his voice carried the unease of someone who already knew what Hollis was calling about. He confirmed that the old quarry had been dug over an ancient sinkhole, a collapsed limestone cavern that extended for miles beneath the forest. The miners didn't know it, Bly said, but there's something unnatural about that place. We used to hear strange resonances underground, like voices echoing from no direction. Hollis asked if anyone had ever gone missing in the tunnels. Bly hesitated, then answered, "Not missing." 3 days later, Bly died of a heart attack. His family found him in his study, surrounded by maps of Ashpine Valley, all with the same symbol drawn in red ink. A circle with a single line through the center, located precisely over the Mayfield property. After Bly's death, Hollis's behavior grew erratic. He stopped responding to calls, shut himself in his house, and reportedly began burning his case files. By January, his colleagues requested a wellness check. When they broke into his home, they found the floors covered in ash, pages scattered everywhere, many written in his own handwriting, repeating the same message. I can hear her humming through the walls. In one corner of the room was a tape recorder. It contained several hours of audio, mostly static, with faint tapping sounds in the background. But halfway through the recording, a young woman's voice could be heard softly humming the same song Amelia had played the night she vanished. Experts examined the tape. They confirmed it wasn't manipulated. The hum came from within the house, faint but real, recorded live. And the voice matched Amelia's. The recording was archived with the state police. Hollis was institutionalized at the Ravenshade Psychiatric Hospital, 30 miles north of Ashpine. He lived only 6 more months, refusing to speak except to ask nurses to keep the doors closed at night. Meanwhile, the Mayfield house sat untouched, its paint peeling and porch sagging.
Local teams dared each other to go inside after dark. Most came back claiming they'd heard footsteps upstairs or whispering near the back door. One boy said he saw a light flicker in Amelia's old room, like a lantern swaying back and forth. In 1981, the property was finally sold to a couple from Portland, the Hales. They were city people looking for quiet, unaware of the history. Within a month, they began complaining of strange vibrations at night, soft humming from the floorboards, sometimes accompanied by faint knocking. They assumed it was plumbing or rodents, until their daughter, Emily, began sleepwalking toward the woods every night. When asked why, she said she was following the girl with the wet hair. The Hales moved out within 3 months. They left behind furniture, photos, and their dog. The animal was found weeks later at the edge of the quarry, lying perfectly still, as if it had simply decided to stop breathing. After that, the property was listed as condemned. Over time, vines swallowed the porch, windows shattered, and the roof caved in. The forest reclaimed what was once the Mayfield's land, as if it had been waiting to erase them completely. In 1994, an investigative journalist named Laura Brenner revisited the case for a local Oregon documentary series titled Vanished Voices. Her research reopened questions that had been ignored for years. She uncovered a chilling pattern. Every 31 years, dating back to the early 1900s, someone from Ashpine had disappeared near the same area. The earliest case she found was in 1909, a girl named Clara Danner, age 16. Her family's farmhouse stood where the Mayfields would later be built. Clara vanished one foggy night after telling her mother she was hearing the song again. Brenner dug into census records and found that Clara was Amelia's distant relative, through her father's bloodline. They were connected by 4 generations. When she visited the old well site, she described feeling disoriented, as if the air itself grew thicker near the ground. Her camera malfunctioned, and all her footage from that day was corrupted. Weeks later, she disappeared too. Her car was found at the base of Miller's Road, engine running, driver's door open, headlights aimed at the forest. Her notebook was recovered from the passenger seat, containing a single unfinished sentence. "I finally understand what Amelia meant by..." The rest of the page was blank. By the late 1990s, the Mayfield case became local folklore, the kind of story camp counselors told to scare newcomers. The younger generation called it the Song of Ashpine. Those who grew up there didn't joke about it. They knew too many names, too many missing people. In 2004, a storm uncovered the mouth of an underground passage near the old quarry, an entrance once buried by landslides decades earlier. A group of spelunkers entered to map it. Inside, they found carvings on the stone walls, hundreds of tally marks arranged in clusters of 31. Near the end of the tunnel, beneath layers of mineral buildup, they found something else. A section of rock that had been deliberately smoothed and engraved with words almost erased by time. What they could still read said, "She doesn't leave, she listens." The carvings matched Amelia's handwriting. When the discovery reached state investigators, they reopened the Mayfield file for the last time. They concluded that Amelia had likely fallen into one of the sinkholes, her remains carried away by underground water systems. The official report listed her as presumed dead, but locals never accepted that answer. They said if you stand near the quarry during heavy fog, you can still hear her humming, sometimes from the ground, sometimes right behind you. By 2011, nearly 40 years after Amelia's disappearance, Ashpine Valley was nearly a ghost town. Half the houses stood empty,
their roofs collapsing under moss and rain. The local logging industry had died, and the last school closed in 2006. Only about 200 people remained, mostly older residents who refused to leave.
That same year, a cold case investigator named Daniel Cole took interest in Amelia's file. He was known for pursuing rural disappearances, drawn to cases that didn't make sense. The Mayfield case was different, though. Something about the handwriting, the sound recordings, and the recurring intervals fascinated him. Cole had lost his own sister, Claire, in 1995. Her case was never solved, and some part of him saw Amelia's name as a mirror. He drove into Ashpine Valley in mid-October, when the fog was already thick enough to hide whole tree lines. He rented a cabin 2 miles from the old Mayfield property, planning to stay for 2 weeks. Locals weren't welcoming. Most refused to talk. The only person who agreed to meet him was Nora Bly, Arthur Bly's granddaughter. She was in her 60s now, living alone on the edge of town. Her house smelled of cedar and dust, and the shelves were filled with her grandfather's geological maps.
Nora confirmed what her grandfather had believed, that the sinkhole under Ashpine wasn't natural. The soil patterns didn't match the surrounding valley. He always said something was eating the ground from beneath, she told him, like it was hollowing itself out. She gave Cole a folder of sketches Arthur had made before his death. One drawing stood out. It showed the valley from above, with a thin network of tunnels curving inward, converging at a dark core labeled only the chamber. Cole assumed it was metaphorical, until he noticed something strange on the back of the map. Faint graphite impressions formed words that had been erased, but were still readable under light. She hums from the chamber.
Later that night, Cole couldn't sleep. The forest outside the cabin was silent, but occasionally he heard what sounded like a low vibration. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure, like the ground was breathing. At dawn, he hiked toward the Mayfield property. The path was half swallowed by vines. The house collapsed inward like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the faint scent of damp paper and rust. Cole moved carefully through the debris, taking photographs. Near the back wall, he found something odd. The floorboards had been pried open and re-nailed several times. Beneath them was a narrow crawl space. Inside lay a rusted tape recorder, identical to the one from Hollis's house, along with an undeveloped film roll wrapped in fabric. He pocketed the film and returned to the cabin. When developed, the photographs revealed something haunting. Black and white shots of the forest at night, with streaks of light that looked like figures half emerging from fog. In one photo, the outline of a girl could be faintly seen, standing near the well, her head slightly tilted. Cole showed the image to Nora the next day. She grew pale. "That's Amelia," she whispered. "But she's older." The girl in the photo didn't look 16. She looked 30, the same age Amelia would have been if she had lived another 14 years. Cole sent the image for digital analysis. Experts confirmed it wasn't doctored, but they couldn't explain the subject's slight translucence, or why the fog in the photo appeared to form symbols, circular patterns similar to those found in Arthur Bly's maps. 2 days later, Cole decided to explore the old quarry. He brought a headlamp, a portable recorder, and a rope line. The mouth of the sinkhole had widened since the last cave survey. As he descended, the temperature dropped rapidly. The deeper he went, the less his voice carried. He began recording as he moved. October 23rd,
2011. Approximately 90 feet below surface. Walls are limestone. Evidence of tool marks. Human activity at some point. Hearing faint water resonance.
About 200 feet down, his light struck something carved into the rock. Hundreds of names etched into the walls, some decades old. The oldest dated back to 1909. Clara Danner. The last one, Amelia Mayfield. Beneath her name was one more, freshly inscribed. Daniel Cole. Cole froze. He hadn't written that. His gloves were clean, untouched by dust, but the grooves in the stone were still moist, as if carved moments before. He called out, but the echo didn't come back. Instead, there was humming, very faint. From below, the same melody from the 1974 recording. Cole continued deeper. His headlamp began flickering as the tunnel narrowed into a steep descent. The floor felt unstable, layered with fine dust that rippled like breath when disturbed. At the end of the passage, he found a vast cavern. The chamber. It wasn't empty. In the center stood a spiral formation of stones, each etched with symbols identical to those Bly had drawn. Water dripped from above into a shallow pool that reflected faint light from his lamp. But beneath the reflection, Cole saw shapes. Dozens of pale figures standing motionless below the surface. Their eyes open. Their bodies perfectly preserved. They weren't decomposed. They weren't skeletons. They looked asleep. And at the very center stood Amelia. Her face was serene, hair floating in the water, eyes wide open as if listening. Her skin hadn't aged a day. The humming grew louder, not from her lips, but from the walls themselves, vibrating in unison with the water. Cole's recorder began to distort, producing layers of voices overlapping, all speaking at once. Stay. Listen. Stay. The sound pressure grew unbearable. The light shattered. Cole dropped the recorder and stumbled backward, but his rope line snapped. In his final transmission, faintly captured by the recorder before it cut out, he could be heard saying, "She's not dead. She's waiting." Cole never resurfaced. His car remained parked near the quarry, his cabin lights still burning. The tape recorder was recovered 2 months later, half buried in silt after a flash flood. The last audible minute contained low-frequency humming, still unexplained by acoustic analysts. In 2012, the state sealed the quarry entirely with reinforced concrete. The official report listed Daniel Cole as missing, presumed dead. No further excavations were permitted, but residents continued to report vibrations at night, sometimes strong enough to rattle windows. And then came the fog again, thick, low, and humming. People still whisper about Ashpine Valley, though the town no longer appears on most maps. Travelers who accidentally take the old highway sometimes claim to hear a song through the static of their car radios. A woman's voice, humming softly. When asked what it sounds like, every witness says the same thing. It doesn't sound like it's coming from the air. It sounds like it's coming from below. The valley is quiet now. The Mayfield property lies beneath 40 years of moss and memory, the well long filled with rain and soil. But those who once lived there say the ground never truly rests. It hums faintly during storms, as if the soil still remembers what it consumed.
The case of Amelia Mayfield was officially closed in 2013, marked unsolved. The files remain archived in a sealed facility under the Oregon Bureau of Investigation. Yet occasionally, maintenance staff report a strange phenomenon. When the building's generators shut down for inspection, a faint melody echoes through the vents. No one ever locates the source. They say sound is memory, vibrations that linger even after the living have stopped creating them. Maybe that's what Amelia became, a frequency too old to fade, replaying itself beneath the roots of the earth. The valley no longer appears on most satellite maps, but pilots who fly over that part of Oregon at night often see dense fog patches that move against the wind. Some say the clouds form circular patterns, like ripples spreading outward from a single unseen point. No one lands there anymore. No one stays after dusk. And yet, when the wind passes through the trees, it almost sounds like a voice. Faint, patient, and waiting. The locals no longer speak her name, but every few decades, when the fog returns thicker than before, another person disappears near the old road. Their names join the hum beneath the valley. And if you ever find yourself driving through that part of Oregon on a misty October night, and your radio starts to catch static that sounds too much like a tune, turn around, because it means she's still listening.